Greetings, fellow scale modelers. I watched with some interest when people referred to a particular book, which is this one, and I will try and show you a better photograph of it in a second, in discussing the thickness of the aerofoils for the tailplane and fin. Unfortunately, this book, nor any of the other substantial number of books I have on the Canberra bomber, give me this particular information. And I want to give you an update on what has been happening in the last few months. I have decided that it will be impossible, in fact, to do planking on plywood formers to create the male plug. The reason for this is actually quite simple. The Magongo wood, which I propose to use, will have to be made quite thin because it is so brittle. Now, Magongo is a wood, as I have mentioned before, which comes from Zimbabwe, and I have acquired a reasonable quantity many years ago. And the Magongo sands beautifully. However, it is about the same weight or a little bit heavier than balsa wood, but unfortunately it is also slightly brittle. However, as I said earlier, it sands beautifully, so I do want to use Magongo as my final surface of the plug. Unfortunately, Magongo is no longer available in Zimbabwe or even in South Africa. However, I do have a reasonable stock. I even found that using 1.5mm or 1/16 balsa was going to be a challenge to fold around or plank around the nose section. The tail section reduces to an even smaller diameter, and so I have decided to move away from that particular method of constructing the mold, or the plug for the mold. I have decided to use the bread and butter method of construction, which used to be used on building model yachts before the advent of modern fiberglass methods. This will enable me to cut out the various profiles on a bandsaw and therefore minimize the amount of waste that has to be shaved off during the finishing of the plug section. Now, the bread and butter method consists of longitudinal sections glued together, and the center line will obviously be one particular size, and the Canberra nose unfortunately varies from about 100mm or 4 inches in diameter to close on 320 or well over 1 foot in diameter. It is about 3 feet long, 900mm. I had also contemplated using solid balsa or solid wood to create the plug, but the volume of wood will either make it too heavy or will make it too expensive, so I wanted to do something in between. Really, this size of mold calls for a polyurethane plug, and I have the bandsaw, which will enable me to cut in 2 axes the polyurethane block or plug, but that will still leave an awful lot of hand sanding and shaping. Now, I have recently been reading a book on advanced mold design, and I'll put up a picture of that book for you in a second, which shows in an aerospace facility that they actually machined that wooden plug like I would like to do, but on a CNC machine. obviously something of sufficient capacity. Now, I do not have a CNC machine capable of creating a plug of those dimensions. I would like to build a CNC machine, but I can't do that in the process of creating this particular plug. Probably this is the way to go in the future, but I can't wait. The Canberra nose section, as I mentioned earlier, is about 4 inches diameter at the short end, at the small end, and over a foot in diameter at the large end. It is quite possible to do this using a threaded rod with individual formers that are located on the threaded rod, and then one would plaster in between. One would use a metal spline to actually do the plastering, and the process would involve taking what is called a splash mold off the formed section, and to then create another plaster male section, which then becomes the finished product on which the fiberglass molds are created before one makes up the final fuselage shell. I shall show a photograph or a picture of that process so that you know what I'm talking about. I have spent many hours studying this particular book and the various processes mentioned in there, which have been very interesting. So it creates a certain negative aspect to this video, in that I have found out what won't work, or I do not have the capability of doing at this point in time. One of the policies in building this model is to try as far as is possible to utilize the various machinery that I do have in my workshop. I have a very considerable workshop and a considerable size, and I want to retain this project within the current capabilities and not make it absolutely dependent on something I don't have. I do have a number of bandsaws, from smaller ones to larger ones. However, from the smallest to the very largest, I do have 1 or 2 or 3 which do need restoration. And in one case, the wheels rubbers have perished. I now need to get the wheels retired before I can use that particular bandsaw. As far as the large bandsaw is concerned, I really want to use a narrower blade. My present blade is 3/4 inch or 20 mil, and I really need to get something smaller than that. It is time now to bring this particular episode into land and to report back to you on progress next month.